Hi there, my name is Jack Wallen, and this is the second time that I've recorded this video, and I'm going to tell you why, because it's really embarrassing. So I have these USB cables that I charge things with, and they're magnetic, and they have these little nibs, or nubs, or whatever you call them, that you plug into the whatever device you're wanting to charge, and then the magnets clip together. So I'm recording this video, and I keep seeing a glint over here. And I can't figure out what it is. And I keep thinking, well, it's my glasses or whatever. And then I leaned in close enough and I saw in the reflection of my lens that this little nubbins was right there on my glasses. And the funny thing is I was almost done with that video. It took me that long. It took me like 20 minutes to realize that was going on. And I was like, I cannot publish a video where there's a little magnetic nub attached to my glasses the whole time, because everybody's going to like, what in the world is on his glasses? No. Okay. That being said, let's talk Linux. Okay. What did I say that first time around? Okay. So, here's the thing. I want to talk to people who've never used Linux. That doesn't mean if you've used Linux, if you're a seasoned Linux user, that doesn't mean you should walk away from this video. Why? Because this video is probably, hopefully, something that you will share with those people who are trying to decide on which Linux distribution to use. Or maybe you're just trying to sway somebody over from Windows to Linux. Because in 2025, which is coming up, there's going to be a lot of Windows 10 users who are not going to know what to do. Because all of a sudden, their operating system is no longer going to be supported, and that their machine doesn't support Windows 11. What are they going to do? Are they going to go out and buy a new computer or a laptop? They don't have to. Why? Because they can install Linux. And Linux will run great on that computer. And it'll be supported for a very long time. But before that happens, that new user has to decide which Linux distribution to use. Now, of course, if you are a seasoned Linux user, you could tell that person which Linux distribution to use. But don't you think it would be better if they made that decision on their own? Because more than likely, it's going to stick if they do. Because there's some sort of pride in it. There's a pride in going, I decided which Linux distribution to use, and I'm using it, and it works great. Now, the other thing is, I'll probably ruffle some feathers. There are people out there that use specific Linux distributions, and they're very passionate about that distribution. And they probably think this is the best one to use. All of those other distributions, they're lame. This is the one. This is it. Well, that's great. That is absolutely fantastic that you have found the perfect distribution for you. But that may not be the perfect distribution for somebody else. Now, here's the other thing. I've been covering Linux and open source since about 1999, which I call the year of Prince. May he rest in peace. Over those years, with various and sundry publications, I have noticed one thing. That most of them preach to the choir when they're talking about Linux. But what does that do? What happens when you just preach to the choir? You're not bringing new people in. Because that choir, they know what you're talking about. They agree with you. They're not the ones you need to talk to. But those people who have never used Linux, who are not in the choir, who are out there thinking, I've got to find a new operating system to use because Windows 10 is going to be dead soon. Those are the ones that we need to bring in. Those are the ones that I have been working diligently for over 20 years to bring in to the fold. So, those are the people I'm talking to right now. And if the distributions that I talk about aren't your distribution, I'm sorry. Don't be upset. Don't be mad. It's okay. Your distribution is great. Works great for you. On my main desktop upstairs, I got Pop! OS. Works great for me. And I'm excited for the cosmic desktop to come. But that doesn't mean I don't see the value in other distributions. Because trust me, generally speaking, if it's Linux, it's okay. There are exceptions to the rule, i.e. Ubuntu or Linux FX. Okay. That being said, let's talk clothing. Where did that come from? I'll explain. Let's say, for example, it's time to go shopping for clothing. You need a new top, a new shirt, new pants, new skirt, new dress, whatever. And instead of hopping online to Amazon.com, you go to the brick and mortar store. Woohoo! And you walk into that store and you mosey over to the clothing section, or maybe it's an actual clothing store, so everything's a clothing section. And you start looking around at all of the choices. And you go, okay, how do I narrow this down? And the first thing you do is look for an item of clothing that appeals to your aesthetic desires. You look for something that looks good. You don't just grab any shirt. You don't just blindly grab a dress off the rack and say, this is it. You pull one off and you look at it. I don't like that. Pull another one off. I don't like that pattern. Pull another one off. I don't like those sleeves. And you keep looking until you find something that looks just right for you. Something that matches your taste. That's the first step. The second step, take it off. You might hold that top up to your shoulders, or those pants down to your waist, or that skirt to your waist, or the dress up, whatever. And you may think, okay, well, looks like it might fit. I like the color. Second step. Third step. You mosey over to the dressing room. Walk into the dressing room. And there are two steps here. The first step, take off your clothes. Put the new item of clothing on. You see if it fits. Does it fit? Is it comfortable? Can you bend over in those pants without ripping the seams and showing your underbits? If it does, then you really take a look at it. You look at how you look in the mirror with that item of clothing on. You might even turn around and you might even go, what do I look like from behind? Does it make my behind look good? Does it make me look fat? You know the questions. And if you still like it, if it still appeals to you, if it fits well, take it off, put your old clothing back on, walk out, walk over to the checkout counter, and buy it. But it all started with aesthetics. It all started with the way it looks. And there's no way around it, but we do, as a species, judge books by their cover. Trust me, I am an author. I've written over 60 books, and I can tell you from experience that a cover for a book is vastly important, because that is the first thing a reader sees. So the first thing a new Linux user sees is what? The desktop. Now, let me set the stage for you. Let's say you show a new user a Linux distribution with the i9 window manager. Or, I don't know, what was Window Maker? I can't remember the new version of Window Maker or the new version of Blackbox. I can't remember their names because I'm still stuck in the old school names. But let's just say you show them a Linux distribution with a desktop environment, or better yet, that just has a window manager. And they go, I don't really really like the way that looks. But you think, but it works well. It's so efficient. i9 tiling window manager. Oh my gosh, you would not imagine how efficient it is to use. But they're like, yeah, I don't like the way it looks. It looks complicated. And then you show them a distribution with, say, KDE Plasma or Cinnamon. And then they're like, okay, I can understand that. I like the way that looks. That looks like something I can use. And in some instances, they might go, wow, that looks pretty. I really want to try that. I have shown people KDE Plasma with a few of my own personal tweaks, and they're like, I want to use that. They don't know what distribution it is, and they don't care. They see how it looks, and they're like, yeah, give me some of that. Okay, I'll give you some of that. Here, try Ubuntu. Try Zorin OS. Try Elementary OS. Try Linux Mint. Guess what those 4 distributions have in common? They all have desktops that look good and are easy to use. I know, I can feel it. I can feel it through the interwebs, you shaking your head. But there's so many more distributions out there. There's so many more desktop environments. There's so much more. But you want to attract those new users with a desktop that's easy to use and appealing and exciting and user-friendly. And those 4 distributions have all of that in spades. Because guess what? Once they get beyond the excitement and thrill of this really cool-looking desktop, they're going to find that all of those 4 distributions have another thing in common. They all have really good package manager GUI front ends, like GNOME software, like KDE Discover, like the Elementary OS App Center. That means they can log into their desktop, they can open up that GUI, and they can install any application they need. So you have effectively given those users not only a desktop that excites them and that appeals to their sense of design, their aesthetic, but you've also given them a distribution that makes it really easy to install applications. Now, of course, a lot of Linux distributions come with a lot of applications pre-installed. Some of them will have LibreOffice, they'll have a web browser, some of them even have an email client. Now, Elementary OS is the exception. It ships with a bare minimum of applications, but the App Center makes it really easy to install whatever you need. Of course, there are exceptions to that. And if you're hearing my stomach growl, I apologize, because my mic is right there and it might pick it up. So again, Ubuntu, which for those of you who railed on me about mispronouncing it, that's for you. There's Linux Mint with the Cinnamon desktop. There's Zorin OS, which allows you to select from different desktop layouts. And there's Linux Mint. Wait a minute, did I say that? Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Elementary OS, Zorin OS. So yeah, I have essentially narrowed the decision down for you if you're a new user. If you choose one of those 4 distributions, you'll be okay. You'll be able to take your first steps with Linux without problems. That does not mean that there aren't other distributions you could choose. There are. You could go with, say, Fedora. But here's the catch with Fedora. Now, don't get me wrong. I really like Fedora. I have found Fedora to be one of the most performant, which really isn't a word, but people in the tech industry seem to love it. It runs really well. It's fast. Fedora is fast and it's reliable and it's fairly easy to use. And if you don't like the GNOME desktop, which a lot of new Linux users don't appeal, GNOME doesn't appeal to them because it's different. But there are spins of Fedora. You can install a KDE Plasma spin. You can install a Cinnamon spin. You can install an XFCE spin. There's all sorts of spins out there. Some of them official. But here's the thing with Fedora that always makes me hesitant to recommend it to new users. Fedora and Fedora-based distributions have a security layer called SE Linux, Security Enhanced Linux. That's very, very powerful, and it makes Fedora-based distributions very secure. But SE Linux can cause issues. Now, most of the times those issues are related to servers. For example, you install Apache, or you install MySQL, or you install whatever server you need, and then you discover that SE Linux says, nah, I'm not going to let that work right because it wants to access this folder over here, and I don't know if I trust it or not. So then you have to run a series of very complicated commands to tell SE Linux that, yes, this application should be able to access this folder. No new user should ever have to go through that. Now, of course, it's a rare occasion if you're using the desktop that SE Linux will interfere with installing a standard application. You're not going to install LibreOffice and SE Linux is going to go, I don't know if I trust this LibreOffice thing, so I'm not going to let it access any folders. That's not going to happen. But I have seen on occasion where I've had instances where I've installed not exactly standard applications and SE Linux says, I'm not sure about this. That's why I don't generally recommend Fedora to new users, even though it's easy to use, it's reliable, it's powerful, it's flexible. But if there's a but involved, I won't recommend a distribution to new users. Because think about it. Think about who the new user is. The average computer user is not an admin. The average computer user is not a developer. The average computer user is not a gamer. Because those three categories of people know a lot more about computers than the average user. So I'm talking to the average user. And I'm talking to you people who are not the average user, who know of average users who might be interested in Linux or should be interested in Linux because they've got Windows 10 and it's going to die. So, as hard as it may seem, as hard a pill it is to swallow for all of you seasoned Linux users, aesthetics actually makes a difference. A beautiful, user-friendly desktop is going to appeal to a new user much more than that incredibly efficient, reliable desktop that you use. You may think that a tiling window manager is the bee's knees because it makes your life really easy. But think about what you do with Linux versus what a new user does with Linux. A new user is going to spend most of their time in a web browser. 90% of their time will be in a web browser. And they don't need a tiling window manager to run a web browser. They need KDE Plasma, they need Pantheon, they need Cinnamon, they need the Ubuntu desktop. And yes, I am pronouncing it correctly for those of you who got mad at me for pronouncing Ubuntu Ubuntu. And I'm not poking fun at you. It's all in jest. It's all in good fun. I understand. It's just like when I call sudo instead of sudo. Actually, sudo instead of sudo. I get that mixed up because I called it one thing for so long, and then I called it another thing. Sudo stands for super user do. So sudo makes sense instead of sudo. I used to pronounce it sudo. There's a great comic. I think it's XCD. I can't remember the name of it, but it's two people, two stick figures. One of them says make me a sandwich, and the other stick figure says no, and the first stick figure says sudo make me a sandwich, and the other person makes him a sandwich because super user do. Anyway, that's beside the point. So now, if you're not a new user, if you used Linux before, me talking to you about which distribution to choose is kind of senseless. Because you already understand Linux. You already know about all the choices. You already know which package manager you like. You already know which desktop you like. On top of which, you could say, you could download Fedora and go, yeah, I don't feel like GNOME today. So I'm going to install KDE Plasma, or I'm going to install XFCE, or I'm going to install Cinnamon, whatever desktop you want. And that's one of the beautiful things about Linux. And one of the things that new users will eventually discover is that if there's something about it that you don't like, you can change it. So at some point, all of this time that you've spent wringing your hands over which distribution should I try first, you're going to look back and go, why was I so worried about that? Because no matter which distribution I choose, eventually I can make it look and feel exactly the way I want it. But the truth is, when you're taking your first steps with Linux, you want to choose a distribution that's going to walk with you and not against you. And the best distributions for that, again, are Ubuntu, Elementary OS, Zorin OS, and Linux Mint. You have the best possible hardware discovery or support. You have very user-friendly desktop environments. You have very user-friendly and powerful App Center GUIs. And more than likely, and this is another one of those statements I'm going to make that might ruffle some feathers in here, you're probably not going to have to worry about the command line. You could go your entire Linux career, if you want to call it career, without ever touching the command line. I know, it's crazy, isn't it? Every seasoned Linux user out there is going, blasphemy. But it's true. The GUIs in Linux are so good and powerful now that the command line is not necessary, especially for new users. Because you've got everything you need in a nice, beautiful, user-friendly GUI. And because you chose the distribution to use, you're going to have a certain level of pride in it. And most likely, at some point, you're going to recommend that distribution to somebody else because you've eventually gone beyond new user and are now seasoned user, and you're going to say, well, I started out with Ubuntu, so you could probably do it too. And that, my friends, is how you choose the Linux distribution. It's much easier than you think. You do not have to complicate it. Now, if you're not a new user, if you're a seasoned user, just pick a distribution. Just close your eyes, throw a dart at a big old poster with all the Linux distributions on it, and wherever that dart lands, that's your distribution. I've done that before, not necessarily with darts, but I've printed out a little image of Linux distributions logos, closed my eyes and said, boop, that's the Linux distribution I'm going to use for now. It's kind of fun doing that. Because I did distro hop for a long time. I hopped from one distribution to another until I landed on one that say, oh, I like the way this looks. This is cool. Oh, it runs well. Supports all my hardware. I'll use it for a while. Or I find one, install it. Don't like the way that looks. Doesn't really support my hardware. Nah. Okay, I blathered on long enough about how to choose Linux distribution. Yes, you could make it much more complicated than what I've said. You really can. But the way I see it, and since I've been doing this for a very long time, the single most important thing to do right now is to bring new users into the fold. And the easiest way to do that is to point them to the Linux distributions that not only look great, but are very user-friendly and reliable. And the truth of the matter is, those 4 distributions check all the boxes. Okay, I'm going to end with this. I plan on doing this series for a long time. And I want to know what you want me to talk about. If you have a topic that you would like to see me address, put it in the comments in this video. And if I feel like I can do it justice, I'll cover it. Seriously. And I know people have talked about this. I'm not trying to make money with this. Not at all. I have not monetized this channel. And I don't have any intention of doing that. I do this for one reason. Because I want to help people. It is encoded in my DNA to want to help. Because I kind of look at this as yet another way to spread kindness. And that's my modus operandi, is spreading a little kindness. Anyway, thank you very, very much for giving me a little bit of your attention today, because I know it's precious. I know we're all super busy. And I'm very happy that you're here. And I hope that you and everyone you know and love have a wonderful, wonderful day.